Cheers, Dan. Happy
Cheers,
coffee.
Jordan. Yes. Well, actually, this is tea.
Oh,
So
oops.
we've already failed. We should start this podcast over again. We should do
Okay,
it
ready?
again.
3, 2, 1. Hi, Dan.
Hey,
I can tell from the mug shape that you're drinking tea.
that is correct. Well done. Well
Yeah,
done.
wow.
You're so intuitive, Jordan.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I can. And I'm drinking. This is lukewarm. What's something lukewarm Mountain Dew in here for
That's
me?
that's my favorite.
Well, if anyone is watching ever, welcome back to the second episode or second installment as an
Mhm.
episode
Sure, it's
of
an episode
Trading
now.
Fours. We've officially landed on a name. We're sticking with it. What were some of the failed names that we had? They were not good.
Well, we had spit takes, which I still think is pretty
Oh
funny.
yeah.
Uh, a bunch of combinations of Gelok and Reed. I don't know. There was a moment in which I was tired and just like we were texting and I spat out like 18 like possible suggestions.
Yeah, there were a
Uh,
lot. I know one that Lindsay and I made was Mule Tide Greetings, but then that sounded a little bit too, yeah, I guess December-y.
yeah, that's awful. That's an
Yeah,
awful one.
not good. It's not good. It's not good. Which is important to accept. Not every idea is a good idea. In
Uh-huh.
fact, most are garbage, I think.
That's right. Well, okay. Have you heard of the 10 bad ideas concept?
Uh-uh.
The 10 bad ideas are. I'm trying to look for these lists. I'm going to be really disappointed if we can't come up with these again. On the spot, mouthpiece, 2 turntables and a water tower, mouthpiece detritus,
Oh, good.
multiphonic noise. Yeah, we had some golden ones. Sorry, the 10 bad ideas. So the concept is if you're trying to come up with something like the name of a podcast or whatever you have, you must come up with, and you must have everybody you're connected with come up with 10 bad ideas. Don't come in with 3 good ideas. You don't assign people like, give us 3 good ideas. You say, I need 10 bad ideas. And so what happens is people just start throwing stuff out, and most of the time it's not the number. Well, it's the number of ideas, not the quality of ideas that comes up with a good idea. It's the number. And so if you're just churning out just garbage, eventually somebody's going to either strike gold or hit something that's close to gold, and they'll come up with things like that. So I've done this with like my saxophone quartets. I'll be like, all right, I need 10 bad gig ideas from you guys. You come up with
There
10
you go.
bad ideas, like, and they're like, play on the moon. I'm like, that is a bad idea. Correct. Play at your mom's house. I'm like, that is funny. However, does anybody have a house that they could host for house concerts? And then everybody like kind of looks at each other and they're like, well, that's not a bad idea, and then they'll go into it from then. And it's like, well, yeah, this is kind of the point. And so they're like, can we play at insert the name of like some huge club in town? I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's not on the agenda for this month, but like, is there someplace like that or nearby? And anyway, so you come up with 10 bad ideas, and that is exactly what we did. And we came up with the world's perfect name. So cheers.
Yeah, good, great. Well, for this episode, because we don't know if this is going to take off, if it's anything, but we wanted to involve more listeners or potential listeners or young musicians or old musicians or whoever.
Yeah.
So we got to social media. I posted on my Zanga journal. You posted on you just sent a message to your top 8 in MySpace. And then I think we also did a live, we created a live journal, a co-live journal called...
Dude, you started with the best reference. You should have built up to the Zanga, man. That's
well, that was my one good my one good idea, and then it was all bad ideas after that.
okay.
So
Yeah,
maybe
that's right.
maybe I just need to stop rambling after I say one thing. But do you want to get into some of these questions, a little rapid fire thing?
Yeah, sure. Let me pull them up. So I did something. We both did stuff on our Instagram, just asking for questions, and so I've got a good like 24 that people have thrown out. And some of these are funny, and some of these are serious questions. But I've got a bunch, so I suggest we like rapid fire go through some of these.
You know,
You've got a few
I've
as well.
never done. I only have a few.
Okay.
I've never done one of the question things on mine, and then I was surprised by the number of bots that just say, "Hey, cool question thing. Buy my jeans that I make," or
I got
buy
a
my
bunch of
bracelets.
those too, and I don't know where it's just like we're the best movers in Houston, and I'm like, ah, this is non-targeted marketing. But okay, well, that's cool. Let's both discuss any of these. So, question number
Okay.
one from Ethan Quartz: do your saxophones have names? No.
Ooh, mine do not. Mine do
Okay.
not. A
Yeah.
lot of people, a lot of people I know, and some old students. None of my current students. They named only the larger instruments. Whenever they would get either like they leveled up to a tenor or they managed to get a bari, they
Uh-huh.
would name those.
Yeah.
Because I guess it seems like a special situation. Maybe it's celebratory, so you name it. But I've never
Yeah.
named a horn.
I think I had like romantic notions of naming my instruments when I was in high school and really in love with acoustic guitar, you know.
Oh
And then
yeah.
like ever since I learned about scales and I'm like, oh no, this is work. I stopped naming things. So
And then playing guitar and then playing saxophone as well, you get in the habit, or you sort of run the risk of naming everything after one of the members of Dave Matthews Band,
yep,
and then it becomes tricky after that.
you got because there are only a limited number of Dave Matthews Band
Yeah.
members and you can't use Dave Matthews himself for obvious
Uh-uh.
reasons. So
Hmm.
yeah. Right. Okay. Let's see here. What are some challenging sax solos you recommend to add to repertoire? Alto, tenor, or soprano?
Ooh,
I'm gonna repurpose that question.
okay.
Challenging sax solos to recommend to add to repertoire. So I'm assuming that Morgan on sax is asking about like what should I play next? And the answer to that is I need to know who you are and what you've already done and what your strengths and weaknesses are in order to go to the next level. I'm not going to give somebody Days and Clo unless they are leveled up to get to Days and Clo. I'm not going to give somebody I don't know, Scaramouche if they're a grad student, because they've probably either done it before or that's probably if they're trying to advance your technique. I use rep to like advance technique and advance musical understanding. So it's like like I'll hand somebody a piece of music and then I'll have them work on it for pretty much an entire semester, or a high school kid, I'll have them work on it for like a good 2 or 3 months, depending on, how long, when
Hmm.
their goal is, when they're putting things together. So like the idea is that you should not be able to play it when you first start looking at it, and then you should be able to play it very, very well by the end. And I'm really meticulous with like getting to a level of mastery about something. I do not like what most people do. Well, most people. I do not like what a lot of people do. There are teachers that do this, and there's a lot of like kids, like high school kids, that'll just be like, yeah, I'm going to learn the doll this week. And then next week, I'm going to learn the E-Bear. And the week after that, I'm going to learn Fuzzy Bird. And I'm like, you're not learning any of these things. And so I'll like, somebody will give me like a rep list and they've got like 30 things on this. And I'm like, dude, you're a junior in high school. You didn't play any of these things. Like,
Exactly.
you're not really getting the benefit out. You might have played some of the notes at some point getting your way through it, but like you haven't reached the level of mastery that you need to say that this is part of your repertoire. So
I agree 1,000%.
yeah.
I was a chronic either over assigner or over library checker outerer,
Uh-huh.
and but then I realized, like, I'm not doing any work. I'm essentially treating these beefy pieces of rep or important pieces of rep as I'm even treating them worse than I would just like a standard etude or something.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly. It's the etude mentality of it. It's like, let's just get through it. It's good enough. On to the next thing.
exactly, which then when I started slowing down and I was realizing, like, why isn't my technique getting better? Why isn't my air support getting better? Why does it always sound reedy when I play with vibrato? Why am I
Yeah.
only like always hearing spit, all these things? It's because whether it was etude or rep, I was just moving through it way too quickly. And
Mm-hmm.
like learning how to slow down and like is such an important thing to do. And I think a lot of students are like, I don't know how to practice, because at the beginning of each semester I do a check-in with each student. What are your pros? What are your cons?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is an okay teaching tool in and of itself. It's okay. It's not my favorite, but then what do you want to work on this year? And all of
Yeah.
them were like, I want to learn how to practice.
Oh,
And
okay.
learning how
Yeah.
to practice essentially just means slowing down and
Right.
taking your time with rep, especially with rep. So I think I maybe have 2 pieces, maybe 3 pieces of rep that we're going to try to get through throughout the entire semester. But even then, we're probably only going to get through 2.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I mean, oh man, there's a chance that we're not going, like, just general advice to anybody without knowing you, the student, the listener. There's a chance that you're not going detailed enough. There's a chance that you're not being patient enough and waiting for something to develop for a long enough time. And there's a chance that you're moving to the next stage, whether that's playing 8 bars instead of 4, whether it's playing a whole movement, whether it's moving on to the second movement, whether it's moving it up to tempo. There's a chance that you're doing that too quickly. So learning how to practice is a great, we may need to devote like an entire podcast just to that. Like,
I would love that. I would love it.
Yeah, I think we should. Generally, just if I were going to spit it out in one sentence, it's a matter of quality. Like, you have to ask yourself, is this, oh man, and even that's insufficient, because it's like sometimes people really need to develop discernment. Like, can they tell that what you're doing is sloppy? Can you tell that what's going on is not as good as it could be? And so sometimes that has to develop, like, the inner ear, the student's, discernment itself.
I agree. And I think, like, if you're just looking for pieces of rep to quote unquote level up, I would then just a quick answer would be, after you followed everything that Dan has suggested, then just dive into the standard pile of rep and see if there's anything in there that you're like, I've heard recordings of that. Why don't I try this out? Because each of them are standards for a reason. And what's nice about the list is that over like the last arbitrarily 10 years, I think that it's been a little bit amorphous, and we've been like absorbing cool new pieces of rep.
Yeah.
But they're all challenging. They're like whereas the Creston may not be as disjunct or angular as the E-Bear, it still has its difficulties, and then vice versa. So they're all viable.
Yeah, standard is something that's past the length of time. If you think about the number of people that have played it, the number of teachers that have assigned students to it and continued to assign students to it, and they've worked on it and wanted to continue working on it, it's like, if a piece is poorly written, it doesn't stand the test of time. And what's interesting is that it's really funny, because there are lists of things that were standard and that are still on our standard rep, but I've never heard these pieces. So if you look at some of these old rep lists, like, I really like using Fred Hemke's repertoire list. Even so, on that, there are dozens of pieces that I've never heard once at my studio or in the 2 schools that I went to university for. Like, I've never heard these pieces, but they're on everybody's list. And those are pieces that for a long while had sort of lasted. And then as other pieces came in that were quality, they sort of were crowded out. So, and then there are pieces that are more standard than others, so Creston is something people should know. Tableau is something people should know. E-Bear is something that once your technique is there, people should know. San Antonio is awesome, but it's not core. You know what I mean? Fuzzy Bird is awesome, but it's not like, and I think of it as like a bullseye. So like, there's a center ring to the bullseye, and there's your, Glazunov concerto, and then there's slightly outer, you get to your Muchinsky stuff. And then there's a little further out. And then there's, way out there are pieces that are sort of like getting some traction right now that are making their way in, perhaps will one day be considered core and standard and really, really necessary. Pieces that you hear, have been written in the last, who knows how long, 0 to 20 years, that are starting to get some traction. For a while, Klonos was super standard, and then it sort of fell away from favor, and it's being played a little bit more frequently now. But I mean, I don't know, these things are not like, there's no like, committee on standard repertoire assigning 5 gold stars to a certain piece, but only 2 to this one. There's no Jedi council making appointments.
Yeah,
So.
I agree. Well said.
One more thing, and I forgot to go this. They asked for like challenging solos you recommend. They asked for tenor or soprano, and I think that's a separate question. What sort of tenor rep or soprano rep do you have that you like?
I don't have a lot because I've just never spent the time. I've only played soprano and tenor a ton in quartet.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think one thing that's important is if you don't know, say you don't know, because students can also smell insincerity from a mile away. So
That's true.
that's something that I would like to research more. I've done just a few standard, like some of the small etudes, some fairlings, of course, some of the
Yeah.
piazzolla ones I've done on tenor, but
Oh,
again,
that's cool. Yeah.
it's not written specifically for those instruments, but I would like to learn more about it. And I
Yeah.
think because tenor is weird, which
Yeah.
also, I have a question about tenor.
Yeah. Sure.
Um, from Charles, I forget what his Instagram name is. Let's see here. Um, at That's not it. I'm just scrolling through all the bots, smiley faces. Oh, at Nerdy Goats.
Okay.
Why is the tenor sax harder to play than soprano, alto, or bari?
Oh, dude, what a great question. Okay, I refer to it as awkward sax. It is like, okay. So the tenor is very stubborn in that it wants to do exactly what it wants to do and nothing more. There's also additional things like there's more to go wrong on it. That I mean, just like there's more surface area to create leaks on the tenor than there would be on an alto or a soprano. So it is more common that there are little itty bitty things wrong. And so saxophone will fall out of alignment, I feel, probably quicker than maybe the other two horns will.
Okay,
So
all right.
there are technical issues there. I always notice that because the reed size is, and I'm gonna confess to something here. I play zero bari.
Oh, sure.
I never, ever, ever play bari. So every time I do, I only have a very minor opinion about it, and I've got some thoughts, and I've guided students through it. So I'm content teaching people through it, and I feel like I can do a good job there. But I'm not going to give a lot of personal opinions about bari because I just don't ever play it. I'm terrible at bari. I wouldn't hire myself to play a gig on bari. Like that's where I'm at. So I'm referring to these three horns: the alto, soprano, and the tenor. The reeds will tend to warp a little bit faster. The size of the reed is larger, and so there's more surface area to aberrate and just be slightly wrong. And so there's technical things that are wrong with it. But then it's like the saxophone itself, like I said, is stubborn and resistant to what it's harder to, for instance, lip bend it into pitch. So you're going to have to work harder to bend a D natural down into tune where, middle D naturals are always sharp, right? So you got to work harder to bend it down on a tenor than you will an alto or soprano.
Yeah.
Larger intervals are clunkier, largely because okay, so like if I've got a B and a G right here, that's a third on alto, right? So when I play the B, my first open tone hole is right there, which means that I don't know, what is that? Like a foot and a half of tubing. But then when I go to the G, my first open tone hole is down here further. So I add another like 3 inches of tubing. So the difference in saxophone size, is 3 or 4 inches. But if I were going to do that on tenor, all of a sudden it's 6 inches more. So it's like it feels, to play a second, it feels like playing a third or a fourth on alto. To play a third on tenor, it feels like playing a fourth or a fifth on alto. And the saxophone doesn't like playing large intervals. It's awkward. The voicing is different. It responds differently. The fingers are moving. So the saxophone flows much more smoothly if you're doing half steps or whole steps. But on tenor, you're getting to the place where on alto or on soprano, you'd be making these really large intervallic jumps. And you've got to make all these, what would be a minute voicing change on alto. Because the tenor is larger, you have to make a larger voicing change, and the rubber hits the road a lot faster. So thirds feel large, whereas fifths feel large on the alto. So,
and I think what's funny about, like, okay, so 91.5% of people have a ton of experience on alto.
mm-hmm.
You occasionally get the high schooler who comes into undergrad who's like, well, I'm a tenor player, and then you have to do some readjusting or whatever else. But like looking at alto and getting used to alto, especially large intervals, and then looking at a bari, like you can just assume because of the bari size, oh, I'm going to be using way more air.
Yeah.
I can be a little bit more I guess the word's haphazard with how I'm controlling stuff, because bary's going to be loud and fun to play. But
Yeah.
with tenor, it's so weird because it's this weird in between. It's this purgatory saxophone where you don't know how much to give or how little to give. And I feel like, especially if you're playing classical tenor or just non-jazz tenor,
Yeah.
mouthpieces are a lot more restrictive, and there's so much more nuance you have to do, which I think, at least in my experience, mostly just comes from learning how to use your air properly on a tenor, and
Yeah.
then the answers start to show themselves to you, right? I don't know.
Right. Well, no, it's because obviously the more time you spend on the thing, the better the more natural, the more intuitive it's going to be. One of the things that occurred to me as you were saying that is the way that the tenor is written for versus the way that, say, a bary is written for. Part of it is that a bary, once you reach a certain stage, you're playing the bary like a bass line, and you are literally doing all these leaps. At this point, you get used to jumping a fourth or jumping a fifth or jumping an octave on bary. And so
Yeah.
large intervals become more of like the bread and butter of what you're playing on bary. The tenor, when you play solo rep, is written melodically, the way that somebody would have written for a flute or a clarinet or an alto or a soprano. And so you're being forced to play this instrument that probably should be playing, more jagged lines, but you're being forced to play it melodically, and so it doesn't quite fit the voice as naturally as you'd expect it to. So,
And then when you play melodically, I know, at least for me, I have a hard time ever feeling like I'm doing whatever melodic line, I'm doing it justice and I sound good, or my tone is warm and clean and rich, and it's also difficult to, I think, perceive that you're actually sounding okay and not like your tone is like, I have a lot of work to do on my tone. Because I mean,
yeah.
how often are you doing tone exercises, even if you don't realize it, on alto? All the time. So
Yeah.
then with tenor, it's difficult, because I know for me, like when I first started playing exclusively in quartet, I whatever, yeah. I was mostly worried about not necessarily technique, but like, does my tone sound good? Do I sound bad?
Yeah. And I guess because we play so much more alto, that's the way our industry is built around. It's classical saxophone is built around alto. Like, we have discernment, so we know when things sound good or bad. And so we've got a pretty high standard, but all of a sudden we're playing on tenor. But the thing is, it's a different instrument. And so we don't know, like if we went over to clarinet or flute, we'd have a lower standard for what sounds good, because we'd just be approaching it for the first time. And then tenor, we're like, well, I know what this should sound like, but we have the ability level of somebody who just switched over to clarinet. And though we know the fingerings, it's different. So, I will say this: every time I have somebody switch instruments from alto to something else, or if they came in as a tenor player and they're playing alto, I say the main thing to do is just to play a butt ton of scales, particularly full range scales, and do some voicing exercises like overtones or mouthpiece or whatever. So a lot of scales, some voicing, and then whatever that instrument is bad at. So for instance, on tenor, it's large intervals and it's some intonation skips. For soprano, it's playing low stuff quietly, playing high stuff at all, and avoiding and finding your intonation center. So it's like whenever you switch over from one horn to another, I don't have them working on rep most of the time. It's just a lot of fundamentals. So they get to a place where they feel intuitive about that instrument. They feel as comfortable as they do on it as they did on the old one.
100%. And going back to what you said, if you are a student and you are working with someone or multiple people and they're having you switch instruments, or you're switching instruments and they're not assigning you rep yet, that's a good thing. Congratulations, you have a good teacher, because you cannot play rep well, or it's not that you haven't earned it, but it's going to make playing rep so much easier if you spend time targeting you and that horn's deficits and working slow and steady and sort of entering like the saxophone zen state, where you don't mind that it's difficult for a very long time.
Yeah, I have my students when they do quartet stuff, like a lot of times whoever is switching over to soprano for the first time, I'll be like, hey man, just run scales, don't worry about learning your part. Your part is almost sight readable. Or if it's not sight readable, you'll pick up the notes during rehearsal. But the thing that's going to matter the most is your control over the instrument. And you're
Yeah.
not going to gain control over the instrument by if we're doing like the Francais or something like that, or the first movement of the Dubois. Sure. I mean, playing the notes and rhythms is going to be cool, and we need to get that. But like once you've got that, the thing that's going to make it sound good is not practicing the Dubois. It's practicing these other things that make you better at the soprano.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Then it's funny because then you're a new soprano player who can only play the Dubois, but you're not a new soprano player who's learning mastery of that instrument.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see here. Oh my goodness, where do I even start? Next question. Hi Gelok. Do you think Interlochen is a good camp to go to?
Yeah.
Avery Murica? Yes, it is.
And I guess I heard a rumor, or maybe I saw a photo, because these days I really can't tell the difference between reality and the dream state, but I think Interlochen just built new facilities or something.
I hope so. Yeah. No, I mean, Interlochen's been churning out amazing musicians for years and years and years. So yeah, it's probably, I'd say it's the premier camp in the US. So if you have an opportunity to go, absolutely do. Don't care what instrument you're talking about. Saxophone in particular is great, but yeah, it's a great place to be. So let's see. How much do you practice Vyasinha? Vyasinha, I don't practice anywhere near as much as I should.
Same.
Anywhere near as much as I should. The quest. I remember Chen Quan Lin from Eastman saying this question. He says, "How much do I practice, or how much do my students need to practice?" You know, it's okay. So if I had the time and the energy, I would practice at least 2 hours a day.
Yes. Yep. 100%.
I would practice at least 2 hours a day. I don't get that most of the time. And I'll explain why in a second. But if you are a student, a high school student that really wants to be advancing, a high school student that wants to do well, should be 45 minutes to an hour a day. A high school student that really wants to get into a music school and do this for their living needs to do it an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. I understand schedule is very difficult. Keep in mind also that regularity and consistency is more important than how much time you get in on a given day. So for instance, I'm more excited about a student that's getting in 40 minutes every day than a student that's getting in an hour and a half 4 times a week. You know, it's probably going to do you more good to spend time on the instrument consistently, or breaking practice up into 2 sessions a day. I mean, an hour and a half in one chunk may actually not be as useful as 2 45-minute sections. And each person is slightly different, but that's something to consider as well. It's not just a pure grueling, it's this much time. I just did a thing on Instagram about the quality and the quantity and the consistency. Obviously quantity, you know, you want more is better than less, but it's how you practice. It's how consistent you practice. I probably, if I'm lucky, I'll get in 45 minutes a day because I am teaching some, you know, I'm teaching or working some 10 hours a day, and it's like insane. So there's no way that I'm going to be able, if I'm teaching 8-9 hours of just pure hour-long lessons a day, there's no way I'm going to have the mental strength or the patience to get through, you know, another 2 hours of my own practice, particularly if I don't have other work that's coming up. So, I mean, that's what my master's degree was for, was to spend all the time in the practice sessions so that I could be able to play and adjust and pick up things quickly. So I've learned how to practice very efficiently. And so, you know, I don't need as much time as other people do. Now, what happens is that my playing suffers. My muscular control and finesse and precision, that suffers, because if I don't get in regular practice time, I lose control up here very, very quickly. This doesn't really go away. My fingers are fine. My musical understanding is okay. So if I miss like a week of practice or something, which happens sometimes because I'm so busy, it'll take me a week and a half to get back to an okay playing state. It's like, not like I can just pick it up the day after I've left and then it's back to where it was. It takes a long time for me to get back into a good playing state. So,
yeah, for me, I wholeheartedly agree. And getting into higher ed on the teacher side, I didn't realize, because I had well, I can't assume that you're assuming this, question asker, but I know that I assumed, oh, it must be so nice being a professor. You just teach and you can practice all day long. And then it's so funny being on the other side, because not only are you asked to teach lessons and do saxophone things, you're asked to do ensembles perhaps, you're asked to do chamber groups, you're asked to teach classes that you've never taught before. So like doing a ton of lesson planning and grading, emailing is an enormous part.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's
Structuring,
logistics.
oh yeah, logistics 100%. Like there are so many factors on this side of higher ed that unfortunately take away from your practicing. So just like you were saying, when we're back in session, when we're on campuses, and when everything's moving, I guess whatever the status quo is these days, I've maybe an hour, 5 days a week if I can squeeze it in. But then I'm only practicing rep that I need for the next 3 weeks ahead of time, maybe a month ahead of time. You're always like, well, I can't say you're always, I'm always structuring my practicing around like 60 to 70% fundamentals so I don't lose them, and then 30% rep. But I've learned how to, and it's not, rocket surgery, I've learned how to chunk out how to practice rep and how to retain all the stuff I've practiced, because practicing and leaving and retention when you're not practicing is also a learned skill. And you do it by just being slow and methodical and doing altered rhythms all the time. Which is something that I've talked to my students a lot about in the last few years. And then they come into lessons the next time and they're like, I'm actually feeling like I'm like retaining when I'm practicing. Like, oh, have you been actually doing altered rhythms? And they go, well, yeah. And I go, isn't that so weird?
Ta-da.
How weird is that? Ta-da. I'm not withholding any information from you.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. No, that's good. It's, I mean, we'd all like more practice time. Back to what you're saying, 60 to 70% of your time on fundamentals. That's pretty much what I do too. I've got a series of exercises that I use. And we talked a little bit about this, like not necessarily like a warm up, but like I have a fundamentals routine that I'm working on all semester long. Periodically, I'll put that up on Instagram too. Like, this is what I'm working on. It's this process, this process, this process. And typically it's something that I'm looking at, like maybe 3 new keys or 1 new version of the exercise at the beginning of the week. So the beginning of the week, it takes a longer time. By the end of the week, I'm going faster. It's feeling more fluid and more natural. So at the beginning of the week, it may take an hour and 15 minutes to get through that process. At the end of the week, it might take 40 minutes or less, or something like that. It's just, but then the next week I'll switch over to something else. And so there's always this sense of I'm practicing my chromatic intervals all semester long. I may be working on chromatic minor thirds this week and major thirds next week, but I'm working on chromatic intervals. And then at the end of the semester, I'll reevaluate, do something else. But that's the majority of my practice time, is that. And then whenever I have performances coming up that I need to practice, that will obviously take precedence over that. So I'll gradually start working that in. Maybe 60% of my practice is fundamentals, or that routine, and 40% is my rep that I'm learning. And then I get to the place where it's getting close to a performance, and then it's 80 to 100% of the time is just on the repertoire, getting ready for the performance. Performance trumps all. So yeah.
I have one more question from Tommy.saxophone. What do you look for in a student as a professor? I know my answer. Quite literally, it's 2 things. I look for, what's the word? General enthusiasm, whether it's about music in general or the saxophone, and honesty. And then I feel like everything else completely fixes itself or works itself out. And then, because without honesty, first and foremost, between teacher student and student teacher, it's really is an uphill battle. Because I think that, I don't know if I can necessarily speak for both of us, but as long as I know that there's honesty and there's trust both ways, the level of empathy and patience significantly raises. Because you realize that, in undergrad, not everyone is a performance major. Not everyone's an ed major. Not everyone's a therapy major, a composition major. So the hierarchy of importance shifts from week to week, from day to day. But as long as I know you're putting in time and you're being honest with yourself and you're practicing, and with me and how much you've been practicing and difficulties and stuff, it's a beautiful relationship, I think. And it's a pretty fun experience for me and for the student lesson to lesson, I think.
I'm not sure that there's like a prime thing that I'm listening for. It's a shame because like the interview process, the application process is like, I mean, you're hearing somebody play for like less than 10 minutes, and you're supposed to be able to evaluate this person based on that. And it's, I mean, that's really kind of hard because the things that make a great student are a good work ethic, initiative. I got to go back to this. I'm always saying this answer for these sorts of questions. Initiative matters more than anything else. Initiative will make up for anything. If you realize that you're a jerk and you're making enemies all over the place, you're going to realize that that's a problem. You're going to try to find ways to make peace with people. Or if you realize, hey, I'm a terrible saxophone player, initiative is going to put you into the practice room. If you realize that I'm a performance major and I'm getting ready to graduate and I have very few marketable skills, initiative will teach you to double or to teach you other things that you're going to be able to make money for on the way on the way out. Initiative will see things that are lacking in the studio and will help you fix the problem before people are aware that there's a problem, or, you know, you'll fix a problem that isn't even your problem. It's somebody else's, and you'll be there to, you know, initiative matters more than anything else. So that's what I would love. Obviously, yeah, a work ethic. People need to be willing to do not just what they want, but what they need to do. This is, I mean, music is it's an art. And so it's a delight, it's a joy, but it's also a discipline, and people need that side of the practice. You need the discipline side of it.
Yes.
There are lots of people that are just here to have fun, and they think, well, I'm a musician, I'm never going to work a day in my life. And that's simply not how reality works. You're going to be teaching Creston for the 17 billionth time, and you're not going to feel like it. And your attitude is going to dictate how good of a teacher you're going to be, how effective you're going to be, how productive you're going to be that day. And as a player, there are going to be things that you cannot automatically do. And I've seen so many amazing players just fall off the face of the earth when they hit the one thing that was difficult for them to do, that didn't come intuitively to them.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, I'm sure everybody knows these players, and I could list a dozen of them that were better than I was going through school and just decided to bow out eventually for one reason or another. But largely, a lot of times what will happen is they'll realize that there's something that they can't do intuitively that takes more than just a day or two of practice. And they more or less give up on it because that's not what they signed up for. So a work ethic, an ability to move, you know, through these things, that's going to matter. The ability to get along well with others, like socially interact. I have turned people down from my studio because I knew their reputation, and either I knew them personally beforehand, or and I just knew that trouble followed them wherever they went. And I'm not guessing, and I'm not going with rumors or anything.
Yeah.
It was like literally a situation where I'm like, this person is not going to fit in the studio. I know for a fact they're not going to fit in the studio. And a studio is a delicate, it's an ecosystem. And,
Yes, it is.
You know, adding a tiger to it can make lives miserable. And so there are people that I've passed on because of that.
Yep.
So in
Agreed.
a nutshell, those are some things, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. How much time do we have? Do we have time for a few more, or are we?
Yeah. Let's do a few more, and then let's let these ones be true rapid fire, because
Okay.
I think you and I, our Achilles heel is that you and I suffer from the exact same thing, where it's like, hey, you want a quick story? And then I think it's like 30 minutes later, it's like, okay, so you've told me 55 things about person.
Yeah, exactly.
X, Y, and Z.
Okay. Good heavens. Okay. I'm going to ask you 6 in a row. You have to do 1 sentence answers. You ready?
Okay. This is fun. All right.
This guy's got a funny username, and I'm not going to say it. Do you have any tips for auditions like county and state? Go.
Come in well prepared and be very polite.
If you could ask any composer to write for sax, who would it be, and how would the piece sound?
I would go back in time and I would ask Rev Weltus to write a quartet.
Whoa.
I would
Cool.
love it. I would love it.
I'm going to have to follow up on that, but that's not the time for this. How do I get consistent altissimo?
Uh, Practicing a ton and targeting your deficits and realizing that altissimo is extremely hard for every person, and you need to dig in and realize it's going to suck for a very long time.
What's a good alto vibrato speed?
Depends on the piece.
How do I properly clean my mouthpiece?
Lukewarm water, mild soap, paper towels, or a little squeegee thing. One of the little squeegee things.
Yeah. I use rice vinegar to get the white stuff, the crusties off.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's a good way to like get the extra, you know, that stuff that's like hard and encrusted on there and you can't rub or clean off. It doesn't
Yes.
make it stink. It doesn't make the thing change color. So, okay.
Oh, that sounds great.
What is your favorite sax?
Oh, in general,
Yeah.
I think the one that's the most fun to play is probably Barry, because you can make just the craziest, weird, futuristic didgeridoo sounds on it, and it just sounds so crazy and wild.
Believe it or not, mine is tenor.
Oh, look at this.
Yeah, I know.
Look
Even
at
for
this.
everything that we just said, for as awkward as it is, and I don't actually own a decent tenor, but man, like when I feel like I'm on point on tenor, I'm like, this is it. This is my calling right here. So
I think now is a good time to let all the viewers know that M. Night Shyamalan wrote this episode, because
yeah,
that twist we just heard
sudden
was...
twist at the end.
Ooh.
Okay, I'm gonna do 6 questions for me now.
Okay.
A good beginner mouthpiece besides Yamaha 4C. First of all, I would never use a Yamaha 4C. Sorry, Yamaha. I'm a Yamaha artist, but man, I just would never use Yamaha pieces. An AL3, Van Doren AL3. I use that professionally for like 15 years, and they're great. What's a good way to handle leaps in classical repertoire? Understanding that the issue comes from voicing an airstream and not cutting off your airstream. If you're going ha ha instead of ah, you got to go ooh and blow through the issue, or ooh, blow through the interval, and then control that. Then you can do whatever you want. But the issue is probably you're bouncing your airstream. You're backing off from it. How can I stop squeaking? Stop biting. Hi, Gelok, let's connect. That's not a real one. Tips on hitting altissimo notes. Is back to the other question. I would add to Jordan's answer, the issue is you're probably not activating your tongue. Activating your tongue means that you got to go yeah. Like if you say yes, the yee part, yee, your tongue is going up here, it's touching the insides of the molars, ee, like that. A lot of times when people are playing altissimo and they're trying to tongue it, or they're trying to simply get up there, their tongue is low or it's floating inside the mouth. It's not high enough, meaning it's not redirecting the airstream. Also, just on Instagram, go look hashtag Gelok voicing. There's like a billion exercises there that would help. And number 6, rep for high school versus college. This is Tommy.Saxophone again. Tommy.
Oh.
Tommy's a student of mine, so
Cool.
Yeah. Rep for high school versus college. That has more to do with where you are in development. If a good piece of rep is something that you're going to be able to play masterfully by the time you're finished with it. A good piece of audition rep is the very top thing that you can play masterfully. Don't play something harder than you can play, because I don't want to hear somebody crap all over themselves. Don't play, 3 Blind Mice, because there are other people in the audition that are going to do better than you on harder pieces of rep. So you have to do as advanced rep that you can, technical/lyrical. And you have to do it very, very well. So whatever it is you can do very, very well, that's your music that you want to do. So, yeah.
Great. All good answers.
Cool.
Then what about this? Let's end with a question for both of us. Is there a piece of new-ish saxophone tech that you're really excited about, or any piece of... Well, hey, everyone, welcome to Equipment Corner. Welcome to Gear Zone, the new part of our show, sponsored by... There's some cool music playing. Just picture it. It sounds so great. Is there a new piece of saxophone equipment or gear or engineering or anything that you're particularly excited about these days?
Like recent, like in the last,
Let's just say 3 years.
Okay. I mean, the stuff that I've started in my last 3 years is I've got a bell weight from Meridian Winds that has really helped my low stuff like a lot. And so I advocate for that. and I'm also using a Very Screw from Sax Gadgets,
Oh yeah,
which changes the weights, and that does not. I think for jazz players, it does affect the tone in a noticeable way. For me and for most of my students, it does not affect the tone. Not all. For some of them, it does. And it definitely affects the feel. And I've had some students that are like, oh my goodness, this is like amazing. And I was able to hear a noticeable difference for it. So it's
that's
nice
cool.
because you swap the weights in and out. So this one's lighter, this one's heavier, this one's made of brass, this one's made of plutonium, you know, whatever. And it's you can actually tell very quickly how the things feel different from each other. So those are the two gadgety things that I've used recently.
I'll stick with two as well. Also, the Sax Gadgets Very Screw.
Hey!
Woo! Hi, Sax Gadgets. You're excellent and very kind. I like those as well. For me, the biggest advantage for that is honestly just the ergonomics. I don't know. I just like tightening like this, and it also feels and quite literally is way sturdier than just the standard front and back facing.
That is true.
Standard.
It is sturdier. It's true.
And you put so much less stress on a thing. I mean, turning something like this over and over versus just this as well is it's nice. And plus just changing the weights. I agree that it does something. I also think it's just fun and it looks really cool. And if you like the way your saxophone looks, maybe you're going to want to play it more. A lot of it's psychological, but I love that product. And then in the last few years, something that this isn't like groundbreaking, but the Jazz Lab harness.
Oh, yeah, of course. I didn't even think I used one of those as well. I didn't even think about that, but those are excellent. They're really, really great.
I agree. I've used some with, I've traded neck straps from student to student because I've been using mine now for maybe 4 years, 5 years, maybe a little bit less. It doesn't matter. But going back to a strap and feeling just the amount of weight on the back of your neck, I'm surprised more saxophonists aren't using them or aren't using something similar. A lot of people are using the breathtaking straps, which are great. For me, they're just too expensive.
Yeah,
they're extremely expensive. But I think just getting the weight off the back of your neck, it opens up your sound a bit more. It helps posture, especially if you're using one of the elastic neck straps, which I think are not great.
Yeah, I don't use Neotex, kids. They're comfortable. They're bad. They literally, especially for like marching band, they're like bouncing or moving the embouchure around. It's not good for your playing. You have to find something else.
If we're able to die on a hill, our hill, maybe each episode will go up a little bit. We've kind of sort of died on the Flavor Reeds hill, and then maybe we're adding another level with Neotech. But hey, it's all in fun. It all comes from a good place because I don't want to see any of my students suffer weird posture issues or neck issues because I had to start using one because it would just hurt my neck.
Yeah, I didn't even realize how much, like, at the end of the day, I would just stand up straight and I go, oh, I feel good, as opposed to the way I normally feel at the end of a day of teaching for 9 hours or whatever. Like, I'm like, there is not a weariness and a pain in my neck and upper back. So yeah, no, I should have. Honestly, that probably goes to the top of my list. I'd forgotten entirely about it. I've been using it for 2 or 3 years now. There is one called an Air Music, which is a Taiwanese manufacturer that makes something similar to the breathtaking. It is cheaper and they're pretty good as well. And I've used that. I use that for my soprano because I don't like my Jazz Lab on soprano. It's weird because it actually pulls that away from my body. And so you don't have the extra brace. So a Jazz Lab, for everybody that doesn't familiar. So what it is like, it's this praying mantis looking thing. And so when you put it on, it's putting the weight on the back of your shoulders, not on your neck. And then it balances against your abs in the front. So you actually feel like the saxophone's like dangling out in front of you. And for some people, it feels too weird and they're never going to get used to it. For some people, you can get used to it and it's very comfortable. So I've been using it for 3 years or so.
Word up.
Yeah. Rock and roll, man.
I think we did it.
I think we did. I think this is the beautiful stopping place.
I do too.
Okay.
Dan, any closing remarks? Any closing takes?
For me, what am I thinking about recently? I'm sure I've got words of wisdom. I've done enough talking for today.
I'm
good. I'm good.
My word of wisdom is wear sunscreen. And that's basically it.
There it is. Good.
Okay.
Cool, man.
Well, I guess whenever we do the next one.
Yeah,
that'll
I'll see you next time.
Whenever.
Tacky end of podcast greeting, everybody.
Farewell.